Thank you very much. So I'm going to be talking about something actually quite different, although, as you might have seen from the questions I was just asking Alan, I'm quite close to the Internet of Things, and so we might come back to that later on. In this presentation, I'm hoping to really kind of address the subject matter of this conference by looking at whether communications can be an agent of growth, a symptom of growth, and whether this means it's a first world technology, a third world technology, or what. There'll be three main aspects of the presentation. Firstly, I'm aware that a number of you here do know TTP. I apologise to those of you for whom we're very familiar, but I'd like to briefly introduce us to those of you in the room who don't know us, or perhaps who know us but for other things. Then I'm going to be talking from a personal perspective about the developing world and bring some very personal views, which I should stress are not TTP's corporate policy, but come from my own background, and I'll say more about that later, regarding the developing world and what technology truly means. And then I'd like to take us through a little tour through where wireless technology is today. I'm going to postulate that we have a direction, a trend in development in the mobile market that is, in a sense, going counter to some requirements that is of real impact in both the developing world and the developed world. So let's start with TTP. We're about 300 people. We're based just outside Cambridge. We're a classic Cambridge phenomenon technology company. There are a few companies like this around, and we've been in business for more than 25 years. So we do three main things. The first is we develop completely new technologies. So this is an application actually where we developed two, at the time, groundbreaking technologies. One was what we now call the small cell. We created a company called IP Access, who were the pioneers in and are still the market leader on some counts in the small cell market. And then we created a slightly more arcane technology, which is the thing that's shown in the picture on the bottom left. Combining these two allows you to make phone calls on aircraft. Please don't blame me, this was what our customers wanted to do. But actually a lot of people find this very exciting. And it doesn't need to necessarily be for voice. This is about enabling the mobile functionality, including data, on your phone in aircraft. Two hard bits of technology were solved to make that work. Our bread and butter work is product development. So we create often tangible things, sometimes it's software stuff, that are real things that people buy, or products that enable services that people will buy. So my first project at TTP was this mobile TV handset. Chances are you've probably got more than one product that we designed in your house. It won't have our logo on it. We'd have developed it for the brand that you see on the box, or possibly for somebody who sells to them. But it would be us inside. And across a very wide range of industries. You can see our small cell on lamppost demonstrator in the exhibition hall, but that's building on work we've been doing in the smart city space for a number of years now. And finally, we do some very specialist technology consulting work. We get brought in because in the course of our technology and product development, we're quite deep in some very arcane aspects of technology, and that's of value to some people. This was a report I co-authored for Ofcom that was published about 3 or 4 weeks ago on a very deep aspect of radio receiver performance that is of extreme relevance to the 700 megahertz opening up that we're likely to see over the next 3 years, where 700 megahertz becomes made available for mobile service. So a 100-page long report that's a great cure for insomnia, but still relevant to this big industry trend. Quite a big theme about the work that we're doing is we are helping to connect unconnected people, devices, things, services, markets. An area that's very close to my heart at the moment is rural broadband. And this is something that we'll come back to later on in the presentation. 3 years ago, we worked through the Cambridge TV White Spaces Consortium to do a trial showing how the UHF TV spectrum that isn't in use in a particular area, the so-called TV white space, could be made available and used for valuable new services. It's been discussed for machine-to-machine communication, for urban Wi-Fi. We thought it would be really interesting as a bearer for the sometimes fairly long-range traffic that you need to deliver broadband in rural areas. And it turns out it works very well. In this pilot using quite early prototype kit, we were delivering 8 megabits broadband to the village of Orwell, which is kind of 10 miles that way in rural Cambridgeshire. Their BT DSL broadband is available, but it's a couple of hundred kilobits. So 8 megabits suddenly meant that, gosh, you can watch BBC iPlayer in high definition, and it works without stuttering. That was really exciting. And in terms of what we do in wireless technology, it's the full gamut from RFID through to satellite communication. So that's enough about TTP. I'm now going to focus on some quite personal perspectives, but that hopefully will give a little bit of thought-provoking insight into requirements for the developing world. Some of the presentations we had this morning were very good, and I'm also going to avoid some duplication. I apologise, John, that in the blurb it may have said I was going to go into lots of case studies. I think we had a lot of really interesting case studies this morning, so I'll skip over those and try and draw out some themes. I enjoy meeting people from UKIP. Anyone here vote UKIP? Oh, go on. Because I have it's nice to sort of have this conversation about, all these immigrants stealing our jobs. Oh, well, I was an immigrant. Actually, I was a political refugee from a country called Rhodesia, which was in the middle of a civil war when I was a child. And my father was given call-up papers to effectively conscript him into the army to go and shoot at the students that he was teaching. He was lecturing at the university, so they decided to get out rather than stay. So I still have family there. I'll be showing a few pictures which aren't from Zimbabwe as it now is, but are from Rwanda, just because I have a friend who spent 2 years living in this very rural community in a particularly undeveloped part of Rwanda. But we can learn a few lessons from it. We've had a little bit about this. What does communications actually mean? Well, Deloitte, who are bean counters à l'extraordinaire, have done a very thorough analysis, in this case in partnership with the GSMA, where they've tried to quantify the correlation between mobile and economic development. It's a difficult thing to separate because, to what extent is there cause and effect? But their particular view, which I liked, was that a 10% increase in mobile penetration gives you a 4.2 percentage point increase in GDP. Personally, I think it's a significant underestimate, but let's say that as a context. This is one piece of evidence that would suggest that we could use mobile to transform the lives of individuals like these girls who are sweeping a compound and help them to perhaps gain a better education and a better life. A couple of other points, though. In the West, we often make the mistake of thinking that Africa is homogeneous. It's much more diverse than Europe. So you shouldn't kind of conflate issues, and I'm certainly not trying to here. I think it's also worth, though, realizing that we can learn from case studies, and the real value is then in trying to understand, well, how do these change when we take them into other markets? So for my friend who spent 2 years in Rwanda, these were the realities of daily life. So people live in buildings like this, which is made of mud. At the time, you can't really see it, but electricity came to her village for the first time And everybody in the village was, in a certain perverse sense, pleased when the cables failed and the power supply went down. But of course, it was fixed. So, this is a context where this community didn't have electricity. And in fact, electricity is still one of the big barriers in the market. People spend a lot of time on fairly manual tasks. These are carrying rice because transportation is very difficult, looking after animals. Kind of the pillar of the rural society are motorcyclists, because they're the people who can get around. They are the merchants. They're the moneyed class. And apparently teachers, who are the second most kind of highest in the tier in this community, I was told, aspire to become motorcyclists. But mobile is here and is really real. So look, this is something that you'll see in many countries in Africa where there are community traditions. This is based around what they call banana beer. In other African countries, it will be sorghum beer. And people kind of drink it, and it's a shared community event. And, replicated everywhere, with a photograph being taken by what, to my mind, looks very much like an iPhone 4S. And this guy's got a digital camera over there. So you can see that technology is coming into this community now. One of the things I find most embarrassing, though, is when we come in thinking, oh gosh, these poor people, we need to produce some special version of technology for them that meets their particular requirements, and so it kind of goes. And the One Laptop Per Child initiative, this photo is by Rory Kethlen-Jones, who sometimes comes to these events, but I haven't seen him here, was, to my mind, one of the most spectacularly misguided Western initiatives that I've seen. So this is, as my friend who was a teacher described it, this is like a toy computer, the sort of thing that we used to give to our children that you would kind of buy for £30 in one of the toy shops. And it sort of has some apps and it makes some funny noises. It's not a computer. It's not, in any sense, useful for your job, but some very well-meaning Americans poured millions into developing this and giving it out, and essentially it was a waste of time. This photo was taken also in Rwanda. So what I want to talk about is, you hear these discussions about famines, of wars, and I don't want to belittle what's going on. There are some really horrible things happening in the developing world. What I want to focus on is not a scar on the world, on the conscience of the world, which is what Tony Blair said, which a lot of people found really offensive. I'd like to talk about some of these really positive observations. Richard Dowden chairs the Royal African Society, and wrote this very profound book in 2008, which was his observation of a journey of what's now becoming the most rapidly growing and the youngest continent in the world. The average age of Africa is 19. So this is a tremendously young, tremendously vibrant community who are going to be the next engine of economic growth. And Dowden writes very powerfully about how, when mobile came to Africa, people thought, well, these guys live on less than $1 a day. How will they find the money? Well, they did find the money. And actually, it invigorated enterprise to feed the money, to create kind of a virtuous circle. And so we see this concept of, rather than Western interventionism, which, as I'm suggesting, is often quite misguided, when you let people get on and develop their own lives and choose the right technology for them, it can be really powerful. And I'll end this piece with one interesting statistic, which was to say that more people now have access to mobile in Africa than they do to clean water or basic sanitation. In a sense, that's very wrong, but at least now they've got mobile, maybe we can help build the other things around them. And the last very personal perspective was, what do people want? I get asked this. Well, people in the developing world want exactly the same sorts of things as we do in the developed world. They want a secure job, they want to know their family is safe, they want health, and they like toys, and they love iPads. So having talked about that context of wireless, Africa, rural, development, what can it do? I'm now going to focus on something a bit different, but these are linked, so bear with me. What next for wireless? The development of the cellular mobile technologies that many of us have made our working lives around, and almost all of us will use in our daily lives, really over the last 15 years has been a story of data. I mean, mobile networks going back 25 and 30 years, back to those bad old days of the 1980s that Alan was alluding to, it was all about voice. But from the late 90s, the vision has been there that data would be significant. We can look over time at how the main mobile technologies have evolved in efficiency. And actually, I was really surprised by the finding that if we go back to 2000, 3G WCDMA over here, if you gave it 5 megahertz of spectrum, it could give you about 2.5 megabits of aggregate throughput per sector at the base station from that. HSPA sort of doubled that, and when LTE came along, it didn't actually improve very significantly. It's just that LTE has a much wider range of bandwidth modes, so you can start to drive more capacity through. These aren't peak rates, by the way. These are averaged data rates. And it isn't our analysis. This is from Analysis Mason, and you can follow it through. It's from the Ofcom 700 megahertz work. But we're kind of at a point here, sort of around here today, with release 11 starting to make its way down into devices, where technology's got quite a bit more efficient. But if you even look a long way into the future, off to 5G, whatever that might be, there might be perhaps another doubling in efficiency, but we're not going to see a massive change. But this story is about how do mobile networks get more data throughput. So more efficient technology is one aspect. As Simon Saunders was talking about earlier, small cells and increasing density is another part of the picture. More spectrum is the other issue. So you see spectrum auctions going on across the world. We have about 2 times the spectrum available for mobile services in the UK now, as we did if you look back to after the 2000 auctions. But if you now look at what does this mean for those communities I was talking about in Africa, or actually a whole load of other applications, well, high data rate isn't something that you get for free. There is a simple analog which goes right back to the Shannon-Hartley hypothesis that you can trade data rate versus range. Essentially, the energy per bit remains constant. And so if we look back at technologies like 2G, the range was actually really good when it was operating at its peak data rate. And as we've come up with more and faster technologies, the range has come down and down and down and down. So LTE can be superbly fast if you're 100 meters from the cell. But if you're 10 miles from the cell, you're probably picking up a GSM signal, and you're certainly not picking up an LTE signal. There have been some improvements. So if you took Shannon's theorem and plotted it down here, technologies like 4G and even WCDMA made some extra gains, and so sort of made it a bit better. But as we move to ever more broadband, ever higher data rate services over the next 10 years, you're going to see range drop. Now, this is a problem for machines. So what I'll spend a few minutes talking about some work now that was led by a group, by someone from Vodafone Research, who presented last year at the Fwic, David Lister. And essentially he got together a club of friends of Vodafone, a number of equipment vendors, Alcalu, Ericsson, Nokia, and Huawei, U-Blocks, Sony were also involved, Verizon Wireless, TU Dresden, and local Cambridge startup Newell. And they kind of got together as a club and thought, well, for machines, we don't need high data rate. Most of the Internet of Things applications that Alan was talking about, that we develop at TTP in our everyday life, don't need megabits. They certainly don't need the gigabit capacity that 3G is likely to deliver. They might be wanting to send a few hundred bytes an hour or maybe a kilobyte or two. But they need range. And they need range because they work in places that are not not necessarily on the main footprint of a network. Think of, say, an energy utility. Their hardware has to be everywhere, not just correlated with where people are. And so this group got together under a working title of LTM. They were completely closed. We didn't really know that they existed apart from sort of side conversations behind closed doors until they reported a few weeks ago and then held their closing presentation. Actually at an event that we hosted at TTP under a Cambridge Wireless banner just a week ago. You can follow that link to find out more about the work. So this group came up with kind of two different approaches. So the diagram I showed before was saying that the trend of cellular technologies is down here, sacrificing range in the interests of peak data rate. These guys were saying, no, we need to go that way. And they came up with two proposals. One from Newell and Huawei, which I've characterized by this, was called a clean slate. So they said, right, we're going to just think about how we might generate a totally new wireless technology for the Internet of Things that might still fit into a cellular operator context. At the same time, Ericsson and Nokia worked on the concept of a class -1 device. That's because class 0 has gone into release 12. This has to be class -1 because it's even less performant. But how we might take LTE that exists today and sacrifice some of this data rate in order to improve range. The proposals were quite interesting. And I would characterize this Ericsson proposal as being one that really should have been in the standards from the beginning. It's a really good idea. They're going to come up with a way of slightly reducing the cost of an LTE radio to improve its range and make it more suitable for machine-to-machine. Despite being initially quite interested in this Newell-Huawei proposal, I have a number of aspects of this that I'm technically very uncomfortable with. But a third strand has emerged, which is that it has struck people that GSM, which in a sense is the bedrock on which all of our more modern wireless standards are built, provides a very fit-for-purpose, already very low-cost platform for building a future standard on. GSM modules today are below $5 in volume, and that's only going to fall. So coming up with an improvement to GSM, which is a third proposal that's just now been introduced as this has gone into GRAN and into RAN in 3GPP, I think could be really interesting. So we're going to see perhaps a reinvigoration of GSM. So my observation is this. In the developing world, where power is a premium, smartphones are still a few years off. People have feature phones nowadays. We need wireless technology a lot. We don't need more expensive wireless technology. We don't need some super advanced LTE. We don't need to reinvigorate the patent portfolios of GSM. GSM's great because it's a really cheap technology and it goes a long way. And it's still the workhorse technology in these markets. But the interesting observation is that we have exactly the same requirement, even in Great Britain, which is one of the countries with the highest population density in the world. If you go more than, say, 5 kilometres away from a city like Cambridge and you're off the roads, you don't get a 3G signal. You certainly don't get a 4G signal, but you probably get GSM. So reinvigorating these wireless technologies in a way that the community is starting to think about for machines, I'm saying is also relevant in the developing world context because it could help to refresh and invigorate the technology for their applications. And it could be really useful for us in this country in rural areas such as this. Pretty picture of the Lake District. This is Grasmere and the Vale of Easdale up there. So just to summarise, in the developed world, we often misunderstand the challenges that you come across in the developing world. But nevertheless, mobile is big and growing and helping to drive changes in people's lives because it cuts out middlemen. It gives people access to information, to healthcare. It is a tremendously valuable technology for the whole world, not just the first world technology. I've highlighted a risk that if we continue in a trajectory that was set by 4G of developing increasingly high performance but also increasingly short range wireless technologies for mobile, we actually risk making networks more difficult and we risk driving up cost and power consumption. So I've discussed this gap and highlighted some work that was going on, albeit in a kind of a silo and with one very narrow and very specific focus. But as I hope you can see, there's a general opportunity here that is something that can benefit machines, it can develop, and it can benefit rural markets, both in the developed world and the developing world. 2 years ago, I wrote a paper where I called this GSM LTE, and I sent it off to a small mobile network operator called Vodafone, but they didn't invite us to take part in their SIG. Nevertheless, I think there's a really interesting opportunity here. It's one that we highlighted to Vodafone then. I'm very pleased to highlight it to you now. We might need a change of industry direction here, but this community has got enough critical mass that we can start to do something about it. And with that, thank you very much.